My name is Mira Calloway, and I want to tell you about the second time in my life I was declared, on the record, not human. The first time doesn't matter here. The second time happened at a checkpoint counter on Zenith Waypoint, a transfer station wedged between the occupied corridor and whatever was left of free space. And it happened because of a machine the Amaro call a confirmation lance. I'd heard about the lance before I ever saw one. Everyone in the queue had. The Concorde had spent 2 years losing ground to infiltrators wearing human shapes so well that even other humans couldn't spot them. And somewhere in a lab that never saw daylight, some Amaro engineer had solved the problem the only way that actually worked: pain. A synthetic body could mimic a face, a voice, a gait, the little ticks of being alive. It could not, apparently, fake the specific neural signature of a person flinching from something that actually hurt. So every refugee who wandered through Zenith Waypoint put their palm against a plate, took a calibrated puncture deep enough to reach nerve, and let the machine read what came back. I watched it work 41 times before it was my turn. The station itself was the kind of place built for throughput, not comfort. A long gray concourse under flat white light, benches bolted in rows, a departures board cycling destinations in a script none of us could read. The queue moved fast, which told you everything about how routine this had become for the wardens running it. A man ahead of me went first, breath already short before the plate even touched his skin, and when the lance fired, he made a sound I still hear sometimes, sharp and involuntary, and the readout over the booth flushed a clean confirming green. The warden barely looked up. Next, a mother with a boy maybe 6 years old, the boy crying before his mother even sat him down, more from fear of the sound than the sting itself. And green again. And next, an old man who didn't cry out so much as go rigid, jaw locked, eyes wet, and the machine took that too, and called it human, and waved him on. A young woman bit down on nothing and made a small strangled noise she looked embarrassed by afterward, rubbing her palm against her coat as she was waved through. 41 for 41. The wardens weren't cruel about it. They were bored. That was somehow worse. Nobody behind the counter flinched at the sounds anymore. I don't think they heard them as pain by that point. I think they heard them as paperwork. I had time to watch all of it, because the line gave you nothing else to do. I watched the plate itself, a dull ceramic square set into the counter, scarred pale, where 41 hands had already pressed down before mine. I watched the lance housing above it, a slim gray collar that dropped and retracted too fast to really see. I watched the wardens' faces more than their hands, because their hands never changed, and their faces sometimes did. A flicker of something almost like sympathy on the youngest one, quickly put away, before the next applicant sat down. The wardens themselves were Amaro, 4 of them rotating the booth, gray-skinned and long-fingered, wrapped in the quilted gray uniform of the Concorde's border service. Their supervisor stood back near the wall for most of the shift, a broader one they called Prefect Ked, watching more than working, the way someone watches a machine they trust completely and therefore don't need to think about. Then it was my turn. I put my palm on the plate the way the others had. I didn't brace for it, not because I was brave, but because bracing had stopped meaning anything to me a long time before I reached that station. The war does that if it runs long enough and close enough. It doesn't make you fearless. It just quietly turns down a dial somewhere behind your sternum until the dial doesn't turn anymore. The lance fired. I felt it. I want to be clear about that, because I've had to be clear about it since. I felt the puncture, felt the specific pressure of it going into the meat of my palm, understood in a plain, distant way that it should have hurt. What I didn't do was flinch. What my face didn't do was anything at all. And the readout over the booth, instead of flushing green, sat on a flat, pale amber that none of the previous 41 had produced. The warden at the plate went very still. He didn't say anything to me first. He looked past my shoulder, and Prefect Ked was already moving, already at the booth, already reading the same amber light with an expression I'd come to know very well by the end of that hour, the specific stillness of someone recalculating everything they'd assumed about the last 10 minutes of their life. "Run it again," Ked said. They ran it again, same plate, same puncture, deeper this time, the machine given permission to push past its usual calibration into a range the manual apparently reserved for suspected infiltrators. I felt that one more than the first. It still didn't reach whatever part of me used to answer that kind of signal with a flinch. The readout sat on amber, then dipped, if anything, calmer than before. "Third pass," Ked said, and there was an edge under her voice now that hadn't been there for the man, or the mother, or the boy, or the old man with the locked jaw. "Full depth." The warden hesitated. Full depth was not, I gathered later, a setting anyone used on people they still believed were people. But I hadn't moved, hadn't argued, hadn't done any of the things you'd expect from someone accused of being a machine wearing a woman's face. I only asked, once, quietly, whether it was going to take long, because my knees ached from 4 hours in that queue, and I would have liked to sit down somewhere afterward. That question seemed to unsettle the warden more than anything the machine had shown him. Full depth went through the base of my thumb. I heard the small click of it seating, and felt, again, that far-off pressure that used to mean something, and now mostly meant information. The readout held amber, steady, unbothered, exactly like I was. Prefect Ked pulled the raw trace off the monitor herself, instead of trusting the summary flag, which I understand now was not standard procedure. She read it standing very close, for a long time, the other 3 wardens not moving, the line behind me gone completely silent, in the way a crowd goes silent when it senses, without being told, that something has stopped being routine. "This isn't a synthetic suppression pattern," she said finally, mostly to the warden beside her, though I think she wanted me to hear it too. "A construct reads flat, because there's nothing under the plating to fire. Hers fired. Every signal a nerve is supposed to send, sent, on schedule, correctly shaped. The signal simply isn't being received as alarm anymore." She looked at me directly for the first time. "How long have you been like this?" I told her I didn't know exactly. Long enough that I'd stopped noticing the absence of the reaction. The way you stop noticing a sound that's been running under a room for years. I told her about the bombardments, the years of them, the kind that teach a body there is no longer any profit in flinching at a warning that arrives after the thing it's warning about. I didn't tell her it with any weight to it. It was just an answer to a question, the way the ache in my knees was just an ache. Ked didn't say anything for a while after that. When she did, it wasn't to me. "Log it as a false positive," she told the warden at the plate, in a voice gone flat in a different way than the readout had been. "Human, confirmed by trace, not by flag. Update the calibration note. Full-depth pain response can be absent in genuine subjects with sufficient prior exposure. Do not treat blunted response as disqualifying going forward." Then, quieter, almost to herself, in a tone I don't think she meant for the queue to hear at all. "We built this whole gate assuming pain was the one thing that couldn't be faked. It never occurred to any of us that it could simply stop being the point." They let me through. The boot heel of the second warden's boot squeaked against the deck as he stepped back to clear the path, and nobody in the line behind me met my eyes, which I understood, because I wouldn't have known what to say to me either. I've thought about Prefect Ked's face more than I've thought about the puncture itself, in the time since. Not fear, exactly. Something colder and more careful than fear. The look of someone who had just learned that the line they'd drawn to keep the monsters out had been drawn in the wrong place the entire time, and that the thing standing calmly on the human side of it had gotten there by surviving something a great deal worse than her machine.